Hello, Leafs fans, and welcome to the Babbling Buds podcast, hosted by Jordan Jacqueline.
Welcome to the 10th episode of the Babbling Buds podcast, hosted by yours truly, Jordan Jacqueline. A once-a-week show covering the Toronto Maple Leafs and the NHL as a whole, bringing in a mix of various analytics and the eye tests when discussing players and the team. I thank you for joining me today, and to make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes, follow us on Twitter at the Babbling Buds to stay up to date on all news surrounding the show. And it's a pleasure to announce today's guest, Arjun, a great follow on Leafs Twitter, and he's making his podcast debut today. You can follow his Twitter at _MarlanderFuse, elite level name right there. How are you doing today, Arjun?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great, man. And how'd you come up with that username? Because I know there's people out there that actually own that jersey. I've seen that jersey.
Oh, yeah?
before.
Yeah, I've seen a couple like at Marley's games and stuff. Honestly, I think it might have been Adam Wild might have tweeted a joke or something. And I just thought, hey, that's just a beautiful username. It's chaos, but it's also just a great way to bring together some of, at that time, my favorite players. So
at that time? Specifically at that time? Okay.
Well, you know, so I'd include Tavares in there, and it's unfair to him, but
yeah, we'll have to figure. Maybe by the end of the show, we can figure out a new name.
Yeah, for sure, we can do that.
But clearly, Arjun, there wasn't that much news this past weekend, right? Like, there's only just an expansion draft coming up in 3 days, so we can dive into, I guess, a few topics. But even our own Toronto Maple Leafs, the team that we love and cheer for, they made a huge trade because they acquired Jared McCann from the Pittsburgh Penguins in exchange for a 2021 7th-round pick and prospect Philip Hollander. I want to get our initial thoughts on this deal. And, I'm going to throw, just to set this up, Jay Fresh Hockey, we both like him. I've had him on the show. He had him in the 81st percentile in terms of his 3-year weighted WAR rating and described him as a very good two-way middle six forward who can play both wing and center. So he's kind of similar to Alex Kerfoot in that regards, but he's definitely more effective at playing in that role. And he's got a good shot and has produced very efficiently in those past few seasons. What do you think of the trade here, Arjun?
Honestly, it was incredibly predictable. Seeing a guy who came up with the Sioux, that Dubas connection and Keefe connection. I think a lot of us sort of figured that there was a good chance that it would happen. McCann only makes $2.94 million in salary. And I think that's awesome in terms of the salary cap hit. That's less than Kerfoot. And as you mentioned, he's got that positional advantage of playing center and on the wing, whether that's on our top two lines or, shifting into that third line center. And overall, I just love the idea of the Leafs pouncing on an opportunity to acquire players in advance of the expansion draft from other teams that are vulnerable. Like, we knew Pittsburgh was going to be leaving a few pretty decent players available, and, taking advantage of that market and efficiency, if you will. I'm pretty happy, and I think it was pretty tidy business by Kyle Dubas.
Yeah, even just looking at the other trades, like the Ryan Graves trade, where like Colorado still had Ryan Graves going to New Jersey, so New Jersey paid a 2nd-round pick in Mikhail Maltsev. That's a pretty steep price for, considering this is an expansion draft coming up, right? So the Leafs didn't really pay that much to acquire Jared McCann, and he is an upgrade over Alex Kerfoot. I just want to get your thoughts, because we're going to dive into, obviously, the protection list implications of this and maybe some of the controversy that's surrounding general manager Kyle Dubas today. But I just want to get your thoughts on Philip Hollander as a prospect, and is this a bigger loss than some fans might think?
I know a lot of prospect people have been pretty high on Hollander. He's got that little grittiness, if you will, but he's still got that talent. He's got a great shot. He was, I think, top 10 on his team in scoring. I think he's a great prospect, but I don't know if he cuts it into our top 5. He's probably in the lower end of our top 10 prospects. And if you look at, the greater implications of the deal, I think having McCann outweighs any loss you get with Hollander. And as well, I think it's interesting to just think about how, we traded Kasperi Kapanen for Hollander and that first round pick, which was Amirov. And, that trade essentially now becomes Kapanen for Amirov and McCann. So I think if you look at it in terms of that scheme of things, I don't think we're missing out on too much, but it's a prospect and prospects take their time to develop. And, he could turn out to be a great two-way center in the future, or he could become a bust, and you just never know. And I think the Leafs window for contention is now. And we've done a great job rebuilding our prospect pool the past couple of years. And I think it's the right time to go all in. And that's what Kyle Dubas decided to do. So it's hard to hate the deal.
Yeah, like Philip Hollander, I mean, he was going to need at least a couple seasons in the American Hockey League, most likely, before he even played. And I know I saw his NHL E-model, which is run by Patrick Bacon, also known as Top Down Hockey. It has him projected to be an NHL player, but we'll have to see. I mean, that's just based off his past production. The 7th round pick obviously is not a big deal at the moment at all. And Jared McCann is a player that I've wanted on this team for quite a few seasons now. So to finally get him, we know he has that Saint Sumery connection with Kyle Dubas, who was the general manager when he played there back in 2011 and 2012. Sorry. There's a fit there. We quite clearly are going to need a third line center. But is it going to be McCann or Kerfoot? Because the Leafs have decided to go 4 forwards, 4 defenders, and 1 goaltender in the expansion draft, opposed to the 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, 1 goalie format they could have went with. So that's now left Jared McCann and Alex Kerfoot exposed because the team decided to protect Justin Hall. I just want to know, what are your initial thoughts on that, Arjun? Do you agree with what Dubas did there in protecting Justin Hall?
Yeah, I've been bouncing back on my opinion on this a few times now. I think leaving McCann unprotected at first was a bit of a shock to me because, just having the 7-3-1 protection format just would have made logical sense. Protecting the big 4, Kerfoot, Engvall, and now McCann, as long with our top 3 out of our 4D. Going the 4-4 route now, I don't know. It was a head scratcher at first for sure. The only thing that I can think of at the moment is that the Leafs sort of had some sort of mutual agreement that, you guys are going to take Kerfoot. Well, we're going to make our trades, and will that still be the case? And Dubas has to have some sort of confidence because it just wouldn't make sense to trade for McCann if you knew that Kerfoot wasn't gone no matter what. Otherwise, you're really just trading for McCann to ensure that Kerfoot doesn't get taken. That just doesn't make sense to me because McCann is a cheaper, better version of Kerfoot. Obviously, his offensive numbers went up last year by quite a lot, and he had a 15.1% shooting percentage, and I think his career average was 9.6. So you could argue he is due for some regression, but he's even a better defensive player than Kerfoot. And even if that shooting talent and finishing ability isn't quite where it was last year, I don't think that there's really any comparison between the two. And I have changed my stance on Kerfoot. I didn't love him originally, and I think part of that had to do with the Nazem Kadri trade, but he came through in the playoffs, and he was arguably our top 3 player in the playoffs, along with Nylander and Riley. And, even with that playoff performance, just logically, it doesn't make sense to hang on to Kerfoot with the abundance of free agents available and, what Kerfoot's making in a flat cap world.
No, I definitely agree with you there. And I mean, Kerfoot's a versatile player, right? You can basically insert him lines 1 to 4, and he could be effective anywhere. And it kind of seems like Jared McCann can do that as well. The only issue I might have with McCann is he isn't really a penalty killer at the NHL level. I saw they were talking about this on the Steve Dangle podcast yesterday. Jay Fresh done this as well. So they would have to figure out finding a full-time center to play on that penalty kill, because there's going to be a lot of change over in that. I mean, you got a new assistant coach, Zach Hyman's leaving there. It's going to basically be a whole new penalty killing unit next year. And maybe they're due for that. Maybe it's time for a little bit of change in that area, but lots of changeover in general. And I just want to know, Is there any chance that you think Seattle takes Travis Dermott, in your opinion, and surprises everybody just because he would cost $2 million less than Kerfoot, and he still does have top 4 upside, in my opinion?
I gave that some thought at the beginning, but I know we're going to talk about this eventually, but just based on the forward depth that is available and the defensive depth that is available for Seattle to acquire and to pick up during the draft, I just think it makes more sense for them to take a forward from the Leafs, whether that's Kerfoot or McCann. As great as Dermott is, in my opinion, I think there are 3 or 4 better defensemen that Seattle is definitely going to end up taking in the draft. If I had to guess, I think Dermott's going to be safe. And another reason for that is Chris Johnston, I think a week or 2 ago, has been sort of implying that Seattle's had their eye on Kerfoot for a while and they have been interested in him. Just hearing that, it's hard to doubt what Chris Johnston's saying. So I think Kerfoot's good as gone.
Yeah, I agree with you there. So you just think they're going to protect Kerfoot over McCann, or do you think the Leafs will let that as sweetener there? Like that's what I'm trying to debate, because it's all about what Ron Francis wants to do there. It's how he's going to play his cards, right? Do you think that will end up being the case, that the Leafs have to add a sweetener just to get them to select Kerfoot?
Either that, or the Leafs already sort of had some sort of deal in place with Seattle, whether that was, a handshake agreement that, hey, you'll take Kerfoot. All right, then, some sort of mutual understanding. If that's the case, then I think there shouldn't be too much to think about. I really don't want the Leafs to have to pay another team to decide who to acquire, because as we've seen with the Vegas expansion draft, that just resulted in a cascade or domino effect, if you will, of players just leaving your team and that you don't want to leave, right? And giving up assets for certain players to leave when you have a priority for other players. And I just don't think teams want to make that same mistake that they have made in the past.
Yeah, definitely. The last expansion draft, we were all so upset because the Leafs lost Brandon Leipzig, and that at least aged gracefully for the Leafs, because he's no longer in the NHL and he's done some pretty bad things. So I think the Leafs kind of lucked out on that one. But there's a lot of roster changeover happening in terms of the players that are even on the team, because Andy Strickland is reporting that Nick Foligno is a strong possibility to sign in Minnesota to join his brother Marcus on a short-term deal. I just want to know, Arjun, what were your impressions of the Foligno trade at the time? And have they changed at all now in the present?
Yeah, well, I think personally, my opinion on the Foligno trade was a bit complicated. I wanted Taylor Hall. I'll be honest. I was a long-time Taylor Hall to the Leafs advocate. I just think the game that he plays, adding that secondary scoring to this team, who knows, maybe that would have helped us get over the hump in the first round this year. But with Nick Foligno, I do think, the analytics did show he's still a good defensive player. And, whether we had him on the third line or as a complementary player with Matthews and Marner, I think he would have been an okay player if he hadn't gotten injured. And that injury really changes a lot of people's perception on how the trade ended up. I think if Foligno doesn't get injured, we may have moved on and our opinion on the trade would have been totally different again. It's hard to judge these things in hindsight, especially with Foligno getting that injury. It's very unfortunate. There's not much you can do. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, no, and in terms of different models, I saw he was even ranked as one of the top 4 checkers in the league as well on TM. He might not necessarily be the best offensively, even though he did look good in the short sample size next to Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner on that first line. He did produce up until the postseason. So my perception on it was, I was okay with it at the time. I did want Taylor Hall. I kind of expected that was going to happen. Just considering you're getting so creative to get Nick Foligno, why aren't you getting this creative to get Taylor Hall? Why are you allowing Boston to do that? But as it's aged, I wish we could have acquired Taylor Hall. And
Absolutely.
I think Dubas is going to kind of change his mindset going into this. It kind of seems like, I don't think all of these veteran defensive forwards are going to be on the team next year. I think we'll lean a little bit back more into the skill. I think we have enough leadership on this team,
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's not even like it was Nick Foligno's fault that the Leafs didn't make it to the second round. It was our star players' fault.
Absolutely.
Really, in hindsight. And maybe had they just showed up a little bit, our stars, Nick Foligno could have proved himself in the second round, right? So there's all of these plausible scenarios we can go through.
Many what ifs.
Many what ifs. And, you know, if that happens, that's perfectly fine because Minnesota is going to be a pretty good team moving forward in terms of these next 2 years before those Parise and Suter buyout implications really sink them. But they're going to be going all in for the Stanley Cup by the looks of it, even starting next season, because they're going to really have to. And just the last little thing on Foligno, do you see the Leafs making any last push to sign him on a 1-year contract? Do you still think that could be a possibility even after this report?
I think there is a possibility there, especially if Seattle does take Kerfoot, as most of us are expecting at this point. And that also depends on how the Leafs view McCann. Do they think of him being a winger with Tavares and Nylander, or with Matthews and Marner, or do they see him more as that third line center? And if they don't see him as that third line center, I mean, Foligno has played center in the past, and I don't think he's going to demand a whole lot more than 2 or 3 million. He could be an option. Of course, there are many other free agent options that could play third center. But I think, you know, just the familiarity of having Foligno in that locker room already. And Dubas obviously does like who he is and what he has after paying a first-round pick for him. I think there is a chance that, you know, the two sides do reconnect later on in the offseason. But, you know, it really depends what happens with the expansion draft, how they view McCann. And I think one thing that's important is not to fall into that sunk cost fallacy. Just because, you know, the Leafs did pay a first round pick, that cost has been dealt with. I don't think paying that first round pick should justify the Leafs potentially overpaying in free agency for Foligno services. I think that's a mistake that a lot of teams make with rentals. And I think we have to accept what it is that the Leafs went all in. They gambled on Foligno with that first round pick, and it didn't work out. And that's just what it is. And, you know, if you want to bring him back, you can do that. But I don't think that past cost from the trade deadline should play a factor at all into that decision.
I really like that you actually brought up that point, because I was going to mention that, you know, what happened in the past is not going to necessarily affect your present. Foligno's getting older as well, right? Like, it's not, he might even still be regressing as soon as next season, and we don't know what type of player he's going to be. Like, I don't think it's reasonable to expect that he would be a top 6 forward on this team next year, right?
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if he can even keep up with Matthews and Marner. Like, as we saw last year, he did chip in and get points, but there were times during the stretch where he did look occasionally out of place. Like, his puck handling ability and his speed did look a bit out of place with Matthews and Marner. Who knows the role that the injury that he got in during the season could have played into that. But again, when you're giving contracts to older guys, you got to be wary of injury history and the risk.
Definitely. And, you know, there's still more changeover happening in the Leafs organization, because they have hired AHL Hershey's Spencer Kirby as an assistant coach. And he was the AHL Coach of the Year last year in 2021. Or I guess I should say this year, sorry. And that now means Manny Malhotra, Dean Chenoweth, and Carberry, are going to be working with Keefe. So I just want to know, do you think is Malhotra on his way out of the bench after this season?
If it were up to me, yeah. I mean, based on Sheldon and Kyle's comments the past couple months, they have, you know, snuck Manny's name in there when they've been talking about who they're looking forward to working with for the coming year. Even during Keefe's availability the other day, when he was talking about the hire of Spencer Carberry, he did mention how he's looking forward to having Carberry work with Manny Malhotra and himself and the new hire from the Canes. And I don't think he would have name dropped Malhotra like that if they weren't planning on bringing him back. And I'm fully expecting us to have a 4-man sort of bench during the season with the 3 assistants along with Sheldon himself.
Yeah, it kind of seems that way, right? Because in past years, I'm pretty sure the assistant coaches like Jim Hiller and those guys had already left by the time they had signed the guys like Paul McFarland and all that. So yeah, it does really seem like they're going to stick with that. And that's fine. I mean, I think Malhotra probably should be working on our penalty kill, right? That's how effective he was. I always find it odd that he was our power play coach. And I'm hoping something can change here, right? Because we've been cycling through these assistant coaches for the past 3 seasons now. At some point, it's going to be on the players really to figure out the power play. Although I understand all the frustrations with the coaching decisions, because it seems like there's never any actual change in the power play, because it looks good for 20 to 30 games and then sucks for the remaining 50 in the playoffs, right? That's pretty much what happens. And how is that formula going to finally change? That's what they have to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy question for sure. I mean, one thing with the power play is we did see some of its struggles in Keefe's first year with the Leafs, which does, as frustrated as Malhotra made me in the past year, a lot of the struggles we saw with the power play this year were the same struggles that we saw in the previous year. And that makes me wonder if it has to do with Keefe or, as you mentioned, the player personnel. A lot of the problems with the power play, I think the average fan can just watch the Leafs power play and compare it to the Lightning power play or the Avalanche power play. And you can see the flaws. You have really one shooter in Austin Matthews, and your other shooter in William Nylander is parked in front of the net or in the slot. And you got Marner on the flank. That's not much of a shooting option. And, all the attention goes on to Matthews. And that's another reason why I love the McCann trade, because you get that extra shooter on the power play. Whether or not you put him with Matthews, I hope that the Leafs do use Nylander more in a shooting role on the power play. Ideally, Nylander does develop a one-timer, which would allow Matthews and Nylander to flip on their offsides, allowing for that extra, the one-timer or not. And I also would love to see, a lot more player movement along with puck movement. I hated how static the power play was last year. It made me want to rip my eyes out at times, like just seeing the exact same thing over and over. And there were very few changes throughout the season. So, the Leafs coaching staff has quite a mountain of a challenge to go over this offseason and into next year.
No, I agree with you. And then you really need to figure out that defensive spot there as well, because Morgan Rielly, as much as, he's worked out on the power play before, right? He had a 70-point season, but he's not really much of a shooting threat on that power play. And Rasmus Sandin has shown, even by his one slap shot goal in the postseason, can be effective there. Now, do you want to play him there the entirety of next season? Well, it's not up to me. I would be curious. That would intrigue me if they did that, but it's all up to if he's up for the task and if he can do that. And I think it might be time, honestly, to at least put him into a full-time role. I don't know if he's going to be the full-time PP1 guy. The other thing that's very reliant here is what's Mitch Marner's role in the power play going to be like, right? Because when the power play looks bad, it usually correlates with Mitch Marner not looking that great on the power play, as we've all known. And he did prove to be more of a shooting threat this year, but he went completely stale in the postseason. And I just wondered, what do you think Mitch Marner's role in the power play is going to be looking forward?
Man, that's a tough question. I've seen some people say they'd love for Marner to just take over the point and just go 5 forwards and have Marner at the blue line. And, obviously that's a high risk, high reward option. I don't know if I personally agree with that or not. Again, they
did in that one overtime, did they not, against Ottawa in 2019? I remember them. They scored a goal.
Yes.
John Tavares scored. Yeah.
Yeah. So it really depends, on the player's comfort and, what the coaches really envision. Of course, there is the balance between risk and reward on the power play, if that's what you want to run. And of course, the other option is having Marner down low behind the net. And a lot of some of the most intelligent hockey minds out there have felt that that's, an area of the ice that hasn't really been exploited and used by offensive teams, especially on the power play. Having Marner there, it would allow him to have that opportunity to see the entire ice, every passing option is right in front of his face. And I think, it could be something that the Leafs do look into. It's obviously a more creative, format on the power play, but it could be something that works. And by doing that, you can have both Matthews and Nylander on the opposing flanks for a shooting position and, Tavares in front of the net. And as we all know, Tavares has a phenomenal hand-eye coordination and he's really good in front of the net along with Nylander. So there really is no wrong answer until they can just keep trying things out and figuring it out during summer, during training camp, and as the season progresses.
No, I agree with you there. And it's quite clear William Nylander should always be on the first power play unit. Like,
oh, yeah.
Especially if you're planning on playing it, 90 seconds out of the 2 minutes out there, right? Like they should be playing the majority of it. And William Nylander should be out there. He's versatile. He can play in front of the net, or he can be a shooting threat, as we mentioned. And it doesn't really matter where you put him because he can succeed in that role. And you're likely to see even more production out of him if you do so.
Yeah. And I think another thing that we should think about is the ability to get into the zone. And while Matthews and Marner are very good at getting into the zone, Nylander is one of the best in the league at zone entries. And I think having him on that unit, it's common sense, right? Just getting into the zone with Nylander, you're giving more offensive time for your Matthews, for your Marner, for your Tavares. It's a no-brainer to have Nylander there on that unit. And again, another reason, coming back to the McCann trade, why I love that trade is McCann. That's another one of his strengths, that ability to have clean zone entries. And I think on Pittsburgh, he was one of their leaders in clean zone entries. And he also had a lot of rush chances which is another thing I think the Leafs will benefit from. We just keep jumping back to that McCann trade because I love it so much. But as you can see, there's so many positives to that trade.
Yeah, and let's hope they can keep him. That would be a positive as well. But there's a lot more that's happening here with Seattle. So let's head into our general NHL news and how this has basically affected the whole week. The whole league, because the biggest trade of the day yesterday was Nashville trading Ryan Ellis for Nolan Patrick and Philip Myers. And then they go ahead and flip Nolan Patrick to Vegas in exchange for Cody Glass. What do you think of this deal for all three teams involved in terms of Philadelphia, Nashville, and Vegas?
Yeah, well, I think just looking at it right off the bat, Philadelphia appears to be the winner here. They get that top pair right-handed defenseman that they've coveted for so long. And as we know, they've been in the rumors for Seth Jones and Dougie Hamilton. And I think Ryan Ellis is going to be a great fit there. And, he's highly coveted. And I think he's got so many great positives to him. He's a plus skater, could put up points. He's good defensively and offensively. He's got a killer slap shot, plays in pretty much all situations, I believe. And I know that, the analytics community has absolutely loved the guy for the past decade. And I'm sure there's going to be, regression as he's entering his 30s now. But I think Philly does want to win now, and he'll be a great defenseman to pair with Ivan Provorov. And, I think his ability to transition the puck from defense to offense is going to be another thing that Philly's going to really reap the rewards of. And, as we're talking about Nashville, I think a bit of a head scratcher, trading one of their franchise players, but they're starting to show a willingness to move on from their core. I'm starting to wonder, if they're just going to get into a full rebuild and sort of time that up with when Shea Weber's cap recapture penalty sort of kicks in. It's something to think about. I'm sure their management team's been all over that, thinking about that, been on their mind for a while, losing sleep over it.
Oh, yeah.
And then, of course, as you mentioned, they acquired Nolan Patrick, who they flipped pretty quickly. And who else did they acquire in that trade?
It was just Nolan Patrick. Yeah, it was
just Nolan. Didn't they also acquire Myers as well?
No. Isn't Myers in Nashville?
Yeah. Nashville acquired him. Yeah. So that it seems like Nashville acquired two sort of projects, right? Phil Myers was a healthy scratch for a big chunk of the year last year. And I don't even know if you could even consider his ceiling to be a top pairing D-man anymore.
No.
But, he could, maybe if they do some work with him, he could play on a bottom pair or, a second pair. But again, he seems to be quite a project as well with Nolan Patrick, who, as we mentioned, flipped him. I think his story is just extremely disappointing, second overall pick. And it's tough. Like, you can't control migraines. I'm sure you've gotten migraines in the past. A lot of us have gotten migraines just from being on the computer. And I can't imagine playing professional hockey going through migraine disorder. And it's just extremely disappointing, you know. It's tough. Second overall pick, and the lack of scoring just really isn't going to cut it in the NHL level. But, you know, it's a project, and that's going to be a project for Vegas to uncover. And I think he's going to be surrounded with some good players, you know, and I think there's a good chance that they can hopefully rebound his career and get him into, you know, a functional and useful NHL player again.
Well, I just got to say this because Cody Glass actually rates worse than Nolan Patrick in terms of his wins above replacement, in terms of 3-year weighted wins above replacement rating, because he's only in the 9th percentile. Like, he's by far below replacement level. And they've even put him on the second line with Max Pacioretty before. Wow. I remember at the beginning of the season, he hasn't really worked out there. And I mean, there's been glimmers of hope with him, but I have to wonder if he can finally work out in Nashville, because Nashville just is begging Seattle to take one of Ryan Johansson or Matt Duchene by the looks of it. We're going to get into that later. So they're prepared to give him a spot. And Vegas too, at Patrick, like, I don't think they want Chandler Stevenson being their first line center anymore. I mean, I had wondered if they were going to make a push for Jack Eichel, but maybe Nolan Patrick's going to get an opportunity to really play with really good players in Mark Stone, Max Pacioretty, Jonathan Marchessault, Riley Smith. Those are pretty good wingers to play with. And I mean, Patrick has a really good net front presence. I've followed him since his junior days because I've just been very intrigued with him as a player. I just want to know how he's going to look in Vegas, you know, because a change, by all accounts, it would be great if both of these guys could at least be solidified themselves as NHL players with these teams.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be very interesting for sure. It just seems like a trade where two teams acquired a bunch of guys that need a change of scenery, really, while Philly sort of gets to reap the benefits of that by acquiring Ryan Ellis. So it's going to be a really fun year to watch next year, to see how these players progress in their careers and to see if they can get back on track and fit in with their new teams for sure.
And the thing about Philadelphia is I have no idea what direction they're going in, because I'm sure you saw those Claude Giroux rumors of him potentially going to Ottawa. They're exposing Jacob Voracek, right? So he could be selected by the Seattle Kraken. I know he hasn't worked out there in the past few years, and it's mainly just due to his contract. But even Ryan Ellis, like I saw in Dom Luszczyszyn's model, it rates him as a player who is starting to drop and play. Like, they're not acquiring him for his best seasons anymore. Those are already past him. He's already past his prime. He's 30 years old. Historically, players' prime is between the ages of 22 to 25. He's already 5 years past that. And you have to wonder, is Philly's window to contend in these next few years? I don't know. No, I mean, this is a kind of a confusing trade for all teams involved, I guess. But I guess you're giving a player a change of scenery. And I mean, if you can do anything to get Ivan Provorov to be the player he was projected to be and look poised to be in terms of a number one defender, because I know in terms of all public models, he does not rate good at all. They have to fix that guy, and maybe Ryan Ellis can help them do that.
Definitely going to be something to watch for sure.
And with that, there's still more trades to be made. We'll touch on a little bit of a lower one in terms of the lower ranked ones that from the day. Vancouver acquires Jason Dickinson from the Dallas Stars for a 2021 third round pick. According to Jay Fresh, he described him as an all defense middle six center, and he had some of the best scoring chance suppression numbers in the league last year. What do we think of this deal for the Vancouver Canucks? It seems like Dickinson's going to slot in as their 3C and drive the play on that third line.
Yeah, I mean, when I see that trade, I do think it's kind of similar to what the Leafs did with McCann. You know, they saw that sort of inefficiency in the market with, you know, with Stars potentially exposing Dickinson, and they figured, you know, at least if we can get something for him, that's better than nothing. And that's clearly what we saw happen here. And Dickinson is, as you mentioned, like a really good defensive player, but a lot of people describe him as an offensive black hole. So It's going to be interesting to see if that works out, because Vancouver's bottom six, as we all know, they've got their fair share of problems with scoring and, again, massive contracts. And I do think overall this trade is a win for Jim Benning, but we'll see how the next few weeks go. And especially with free agency, as we know that Vancouver's got their history of giving out not the best contracts in free agency.
Oh, Vancouver's already ready to get out the checkbook by the sounds of it, because they're prepared to offer Zach Hyman a contract at 6 or 7 years by the looks of it. Jim Benning's right back in his happy place by the looks of it. He's going to be right there on July 28th. The only thing I have to say about this deal is, yes, in terms of like what it is, it's a good deal, but if Dallas knew they were likely going to lose Jason Dickinson, right? I feel like a 3rd round pick is somewhat of a steep price. I think you could have acquired him for slightly less. No, when you what do you think about that?
I think at first, seeing the 3rd round pick, I was like, that's pretty good value. But then seeing what the Leafs paid for McCann, who is obviously a much better player, it does make you shake your head a bit, because Vancouver did pay a 3rd round pick, as you mentioned, and the Leafs gave up a 7th, and a prospect who, I think you can argue may not have a place with the Leafs full time within the coming couple years. And who knows in the years after that if he will be blocked by other prospects that are going to leapfrog him. So it does make you wonder if, Vancouver did overpay a little bit, but, I guess we'll see how the fit works out. I do think Dickinson, just a side note, that he's a great guy, as, we all saw, in the bubble when he was one of the few players in the league to kneel during the anthem with, Ryan Reeves, Robin Leonard, and I think Tyler Seguin. And that just shows that, he is a good character person. And I think he'll fit in well with, Vancouver, which is one of the more progressive cities in the world. So I think, the character fit is there, and we'll see how it works out on the ice as well.
No, definitely. And we don't know if other teams were involved, right? So that might be why the asking price ended up being a 3rd round pick, and they ultimately paid it. But I do think Dickinson is a type of player you want on your team. And if they can get rid of some of the guys like Jay Beagle, I know they're likely moving on from Braden Sutter this offseason as well. So replacing him with that type of player, I think that's actually a good move, and Canucks fans should actually be happy with the outcome of this deal.
Definitely not the worst move the Canucks have made in the past few years.
Oh, no, definitely doesn't even rank in the top 10 or maybe even top 50. But the protection lists are out now for every NHL team. Just a few hours ago, they were all released publicly. So let's discuss some of the notable names that have been left exposed and Seattle could select. First, I'll put out some of the name value players, just names that even the casual fans would be like, whoa. This guy's actually available. This is coming from Ryan S. Clark, the Seattle Kraken reporter for The Athletic. So these names include Carey Price, Vladimir Tarasenko, Gabriel Landeskog. He's a UFA. I don't know if they actually select him. Ryan Johansson, Mark Giordano, Jonathan Drouin, Yanni Gourde, Tyler Johnson, Jason Zucker, Jared McCann, and Minnesota's goaltender Kaapo Kähkönen. These are among the players that have been exposed ahead of the expansion draft. I'll also add on Jay Fresh Hockey has cited Yanni Gourde, Jordan Eberle, Nino Niederreiter, and Jared McCann as the best forwards available in terms of their win above replacement level. For defensemen, he has Dylan DeMello, Mark Giordano, Brendan Dillon, Vince Dunn, and Nick Jensen. These are the best defensemen that are available in this expansion draft. Let's just talk about it. First, we'll get into Carey Price, because that's obviously the biggest storyline that's gone down. He's been left exposed by the Montreal Canadiens because they do want to protect Jake Allen. Do you think there's any chance Seattle takes on $10.5 million of Carey Price?
The one thing with Seattle is they've made a lot of analytic hires that I think a lot of people that I have noticed in the analytic community have praised. I think they're going to be a very calculated team when it comes to the expansion draft. And I don't know if they're going to be the type of team to take on these big contracts, especially if they know that it's of an aging player or a player with injury risk. If you're good, for example, if you're going for a player such as Vladimir Tarasenko, do you really also want to go for Carey Price when you have, the risk of Price's future regression and Tarasenko's injury history? And I think that's something they're definitely going to have to balance out, because they don't want to be taking too many players that are of high risk and potentially low reward. And with Carey Price, of course he showed in the playoffs that he is still got the potential to be one of the top goaltenders in the league. But I think it's still important to realize that in the larger scheme of things, in the regular season, I don't know if you can say that Carey Price was Montreal's best goalie during the regular season. I think Jake Allen at times did appear to be the bigger threat in the crease for the Montreal Canadiens.
Well, if you really wanted to say, like, Jake Allen is probably the reason why Montreal's even got to the playoffs last year.
Oh yeah, I think you can argue that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Jake Allen, by playing so much, resulted in a healthy Carey Price and a well-rested Carey Price in the playoffs, which, might have contributed to how fantastic he looked in the playoffs.
Definitely. Like, had the Habs missed the playoffs, I think a lot more fans would have actually supported this decision, because it almost would have been slam dunk. Seattle wouldn't take them now. It's obviously led to a little bit more of a debate, I mean, it also, Carey Price is from that area, right? So, and yes, so is his wife. Yeah. So that's also another factor into this. It would be incredibly amazing if they actually did take him, because that would just be pretty, lead to a lot of interesting discussions, debates, and it would be awesome just to see him play there, and just to see how he would actually perform in that type of environment. I mean, he's only ever played in Montreal, right?
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting for sure.
But they're also, by all accounts, it sounds like they are selecting Chris Driedger out of Florida, and he wants $3.5 million. So at that point, you're paying, I mean, I guess you're basically paying what Montreal was paying, and that's $14 million for your goaltending tandem right off the bat. So I don't know. I mean, by all accounts, when you're building a team, you should not be giving that much money to a goaltender.
Absolutely not. And I think, what we mentioned, like with Seattle being as, calculated and prudent as they are, I don't think that they're going to be a team to hop on the $10 million for a goalie kind of thing. I think they're going to look for their Driedgers and goaltenders that aren't necessarily getting paid, a boatload of money like Carey Price. And I think they're definitely going to benefit from selecting a goalie not named Carey Price. And it would be interesting, of course, to see Montreal get out of the Shea Weber and Carey Price contracts within a couple of years of each other, but I don't think it's going to happen, to be honest.
No, I agree with you there. Now, a player that's a big name in the NHL that I think could honestly actually be selected by them is PK Subban. I know he makes $9 million, but he only has 1 year left on his contract. And for a new team coming in, PK Subban is definitely the type of player that you want being kind of the spokesperson of your team. Do you think Seattle takes a chance and just selects PK Subban from the New Jersey Devils?
I mean, yeah, as you mentioned, like it's only a year left on his contract, so the cap hit's really not anything to worry about too much. I think just the character that he brings from a marketing standpoint, it would just be a no-brainer to select the guy. The other notable player that I was thinking of that New Jersey might lose would be Andreas Janssen, but just with that injury history there, I think Seattle might not be as keen on going that route, which does make me sort of, think that PK Subban could be a great fit there. Again, we'll have to wait and see, but I think from a marketing standpoint, at least, that would be just a no-brainer decision.
And yeah, like there's a lot of good players here that are available. That are kind of shocking. Like the New York Islanders protected Matt Martin over Jordan Eberle.
That's the Lou Lamoriello special.
And they had literally just cleared exactly like $5.5 million in Andrew Ladd's contract, which they shipped 2 second round picks and a third round pick to Arizona for. So they literally had cleared up the cap just so they could even potentially keep a guy like Eberle, and now they're just exposing him. And he's, by all accounts, the second or third best forward available in terms of his analytic profile due to multiple pros. Like, I can't believe he's available, because that's the type of player they're definitely going to select. I would be shocked if they don't select him or Josh Bailey.
Yeah, same here. I think that was just a good old Lou Lamoriello special there. And I don't think it was too surprising that he decided to protect Matt Martin, seeing the history that was there. But it's going to be interesting. It does seem like the Islanders really do want to clear cap space out. So we'll see the big plans they have going on in the offseason. I mean, they do have their own fair share of players that they need to bring back and give some hefty raises to, but I think they'll still have some money to play around, especially after that Nicoletti trade and with whoever they lose in the expansion draft.
Definitely. And the Leafs weren't the only Canadian team to make a sort of a controversial move ahead of this expansion draft. The Winnipeg Jets choosing to protect Logan Stanley over Dylan DeMello. Now, Dylan DeMello was in the 94th percentile in terms of his 3-year weighted WAR. I don't know necessarily what NHL teams' internal models would rank him as, because this guy's just been thrown around in the league all over the place. And he's like literally, he could be a solid second pairing defender by all accounts. And he can play, he's a versatile player, can play anywhere in terms of your first to third pairing. that's a great player for Seattle to pick up because he's going to provide value for the money he's making in terms of his $3 million cap hit. I just don't understand why Winnipeg did that. I know Logan Stanley had that 2-goal game, so maybe that's maybe the only reason. He's 6'7", I guess. But looking at his analytical profile and just kind of watching him play as a player, he's not that special. Like, it took him a long time just to even get to the National Hockey League relative to his draft position, right? So that's a head-scratching move for me. I'm curious to get your take on it, Arjun.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Dylan DeMello is a really good defenseman, as you mentioned. He was a player that I think a lot of Leaf fans wanted a couple deadlines ago. I wanted him too, and I think he would have been a great fit. I think he would have been really good next to Jake Muzzin. But of course, Winnipeg seems to be making a bit of an old school hockey decision here with protecting their big homegrown talent in Logan Stanley. And seems that they're willing to let Dylan DeMello go. But I mean, we'll see what happens if there's any trades that are going to come down the line with these teams in Seattle to see whether or not they do end up taking Dylan DeMello and players of that nature.
Alrighty, so with that, I always end off my shows like this. We're going to do our 3 NHL predictions. I'm going to hand you a few true or false. All you got to say is true or false, and then we'll just expand right on. Are you ready there, Arjun?
Sure
the first question. Seattle makes the playoffs. True or false in their inaugural season? What do you think?
I'm going to say true. Do you want me to expand on that now, or do you want to go?
Expand on it.
All right. Well, I think true because they're going to have a good team, but that's not really the main reason why. It's more because their division flat out sucks. And I think it's going to really be a battle between them and the Oilers to see who finishes second in their division. I think they're going to have a pretty good team. As you mentioned, you've kind of gone through all the names, but, they might have a JVR. They might have Max Domi, Tarasenko, Niederreiter, Aberle, Jensen or Dylan, Troy Stetcher. Like, there are a lot of good names. Mark Giordano. Like, there's a ton of absolutely incredible names out there.
It did not feel like this. Like, it doesn't feel like, doesn't this kind of just feel different than the Vegas expansion draft? Because it didn't feel like this level of names were available to them.
Yeah, it didn't at all. And I think a lot of these names feel like a bit of a surprise. I don't know, maybe I just haven't been paying attention to all the rumors that have been going on, but a lot of these names do come out as a bit of a shocker. But I mean, we're going to see, right? I think whether or not these players are actually going to be taken, or if there are going to be side deals in place to ensure that, certain teams get to hold on to their unprotected players, Seattle's either going to have a really good team or a good team plus a bunch of picks, which they can flip for assets. So I think they're going to be ready to go for the upcoming season. And I think we should be able to expect them in the playoffs this upcoming year.
Definitely, because they're in that Pacific division, as you mentioned, with the 3 California teams, the 3 Western Canadian teams. It's not exactly going to be that hard of a task to even make the postseason. Honestly.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I'm going to be honest with you. So they definitely have a clear path to make it if they choose to. Now we got a Leafs-oriented question for number 2. The Leafs trade Travis Dermott in the offseason. True or false? They just re-signed him to that 2-year deal with a $1.5 million AAV. What do you think, Arjun?
If I had to guess, I think I'm going to lean towards false at the moment, but it's really close. I think it really depends on whether or not they re-sign Zach Bogosian. I think if we were to look at the Leafs D-core right now, the top 4 it seems like it's going to be intact with Justin Hall being protected in the expansion draft. And that basically just leaves the bottom pair up for grabs. And is it going to be Rasmus Sandin? Is it going to be Timothy Liljegren? Is it going to be Travis Dermott? And I think having maybe a rotation of those 3 guys could be something the Leafs do look into, especially if Zach Bogosian doesn't come back next year. I think Dermott has shown an ability that he can play on the left and the right side, especially with his quick hands and his ability to just use his good footwork to get him out of trouble. I think he could work well next to Sandin or Liljegren. And I think you can never have too much defensive depth. And considering the cap hit that he's making this year, it shouldn't be something that the Leafs are actively looking to move on from Dermott. I still think he's got top 4 upside, and I still think that he could even be better than Justin Hall next year in that same role beside Jake Muzzin, but we'll see. We don't know the inside of Kyle Dubas's brain as much as we wish we did.
I know. It's confusing with me as Dermot, right? Because by all accounts, he was less last season, right? I've heard that, and his salary was doubled. So, I mean, he's not necessarily that popular among Leafs fans at the moment, especially after that brain-headed play he made in overtime.
Oh
And I
man.
know, and I mean, he makes that play a lot, right? And even in the very next game, he made that exact same play and was successful. And that's the thing with Dermot is he can make that play 90% of the time, but the 10% it's going to cost you. And
Yeah.
you have to wonder, is he finally going to become the player he's meant to be? And is that going to be in Toronto? I don't know. Another player I'm very curious about is Timothy Liljegren. Is this guy ever going to get an actual chance to be on an NHL roster for a long-term period of time? Because the Leafs have invested a lot into this player. He's clearly too good for the American Hockey League. This is the year, in my opinion, that you have to see if he's a National Hockey League player now.
I think they got to give him an extended look, like that's another reason why I was honestly okay with Justin Hall being exposed in the expansion draft. I think Sandin, Liljegren, and Dermott all are players that deserve constant minutes on this team. And whether that means Dermott being paired with Muzzin or having Liljegren there, I think that's something I really wanted to see for this upcoming year. And by all looks of it, it doesn't seem like we're going to get that. Bearing injury, of course, which, through an 82 game season next year, I'm sure that'll happen at some point. But I still think Liljegren will get his looks with the Leafs next year. Do I think he'll play every game? Probably not. But I think he'll get his looks, and I think he'll prove a lot of people wrong that have, too quickly labeled him as a bust.
Definitely. And you never know, Arjun. And this might be a season like I think it was 2017-18 where the Leafs literally had like no injuries on their roster and pretty much everybody Do you remember that season where I think only like one or two players got injured at all?
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, no. But sadly, that's not going to likely be the case. And with that, this is going to be an interesting question. I'm curious to get your answer to this. This is the last one. This upcoming season will be Kyle Dubas's last as the Leafs GM. True or false?
Man, that's a tough one. I'm going to lean with false. I think from everything that we've seen with Brendan Shanahan, he has bought into Kyle Dubas, and these guys are close. He's invested a lot into Dubas. He had the opportunity to stick with Lou Lamoriello, and he chose Kyle Dubas. And as much as Lou Lamoriello has had his faults with the Leafs, and I don't agree with majority of his decisions in Long Island, he's got that history, he's got that pedigree, and he's done some great things in the NHL. And, I think most people in Shanahan's position would have stuck with Lou Lamoriello when you're comparing him with Kyle Dubas. And Shanahan made that tough decision to go with Kyle Dubas, and that kind of pushed Lou out of the door. And I think that's shown all of us that Kyle Dubas and Brendan Shanahan are here for the long run. And especially when you look at all these GMs, especially in, Western Canada and even all over the league, that have shown over and over, time and time again, that they are not good general managers. They're still around decades later. So I think Kyle Dubas deserves his shot to stay around longer. But I think this is a very important year for whether or not it's the management's last year together. I think the core four could be changing next year if they can't get over that hump.
Well, there for sure will be a huge change if the exact same results happen,
Yeah.
There's absolutely no way they're going to stick with everybody, whether it's Sheldon Keefe maybe being fired or one of the core four being changed. I tend to agree with you. I would go false there. I know Kyle Dubas has lost some fans. I'm even seeing it today, obviously, with his decision. I tend to believe in him, though. I don't know. I have a feeling that he is going to be the guy that gets the Leafs their first Stanley Cup, right, since 1967. I generally like most of the moves he makes, and he always does have a reasoning behind it, whether we're just not going to always know what it is, right? The team has their own internal metrics they vibe by. Even looking at his Cody Ceci comments, those actually age pretty good, right? Remember when he said there was a referendum on Cody Ceci? Well, look what he did in Pittsburgh this past year when he was deployed properly as a third pairing defender, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So who knows? And then maybe he'll look good. I mean, I just don't know, right? So I want to believe Kyle Dubas can do this. And I hope that I really just want the players that are here to do this. I want them to be able to actually win. I don't want to have to recycle through a bunch of other players every season. I want the guys that I've been cheering for the past half a decade to step up and the people that have been brought in. I wanted to work with these guys.
I wanted to work with these guys too, man. Like, the day that John Tavares signed, I thought this team would be something special. And, the day that Mike Babcock became the head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs, I don't know if you remember that press conference when he was like, there's going to be pain, but, I want to be here for multiple cups. And then when my deal expires, I'll re-sign for another 2 years and win another 2 cups. And, those were the moments when, as a fan, you really started to believe in this team. And, it's no secret that we've been disappointed time and time again and broken. And you could argue that we've been emotionally scarred and abused by this hockey team. But I think, we're due. And why not us? Why not us?
Cal Dubas said we can and we will, I want him to I want that to be the case, because I will scream that at the top of my lungs if they are actually able to do it with this core. I'll scream that every day to all of the doubters.
With that new acquisition, we McCann and we McWill.
McWill. Oh, wow. Okay. But with that, thank you for joining us, Arjun, because we are ready to end the show. So thank you for listening to the Babbling Buds podcast. Make sure to follow Arjun on Twitter. Once again, his username is @_MarlanderFuse. But just before we end here, do you think we can add Tavares into that name? Any ideas?
I don't know, man. That's going to be tough. It would be like Marlander Fuse Varus, maybe. That's going to be
Marlarland Fuse.
That's quite the task for me to come up with. I'll leave that to you and your listeners to figure out a new username for me.
Well, we will definitely have to figure it out. And just make sure you follow him, because he always does awesome tweets. He covers the team. He's been doing it for quite a while. And once again, thanks for listening and watching. And we have babbled enough for today. Until next time.